Good afternoon and welcome to the March 9th, 2022 Public Planning Committee meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Krista, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, sir, we are.
Would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Mrs. Becker? Here. Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Stanford?
Here.
And Mr. Ames?
Here.
All present, sir.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Okay. Approval of minutes, January 27th. Is there a motion to approve any?
Move adoption is written.
Okay, is there a second? Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimous. Thank you. Under normal conditions, we have appearance by citizens at this time, but I'm aware that there are some members of public who want to speak to the short-term rental ordinance discussion. You have the option to either speak now or to hear the staff's presentation and then make your comments. So whichever you prefer is fine with the committee. Okay. Krista, would you? And I've been told to remind our citizens of the town's rules and procedures for public comment. Once your name has been called, please state your name for the record. Each citizen has 3 minutes to address the committee. At the end of the 3 minutes, you are asked to conclude your comments. Citizens are asked to maintain decorum suitable for the meeting and refrain from using any profane, abusive, or obscene language. Thank you. Krista?
Certainly, sir. The first person we have signed up is Kaylee Coward. Ms. Coward? Next, we have Mr. Drew Brown. Mr. Brown?
Hi, Drew.
Afternoon, everyone. How are you? My name is Drew Brown. I'm the managing partner at Island Time Hilton Head. We're a vacation rental and property management company that operates 110 properties in all areas of the island. We have 18 employees that are also local residents on Hilton Head Island and in Bluffton. I've been a resident of Hilton Head Island for almost 20 years, working all of that time in the vacation rental industry. My family started visiting Hilton Head in 1967, so I've personally seen the evolution of tourism and hospitality on our island. My children are the 4th generation of Browns to be on Hilton Head. I speak to you today to request more time to review the short-term rental ordinance before this committee. I know there is a timeline for the project and ask that prudence be taken at the committee level to make sure that all aspects of imposing regulations on this vital part of our economy are taken. In the presentation you will see today, we've provided an economic impact and housing study that was completed at the request of the South Carolina Vacation Rental Alliance, a statewide group made up of industry leaders, policymakers, and state representatives that was founded in 2020. It outlines the $4 billion industry annually that is vacation rentals to our state. It also outlines the additional services, occupations, and industries that are involved with vacation rentals and also impacted by vacation rentals. While there's much discussion about what the problem is to be solved by regulating vacation rentals with a short-term rental ordinance, the underlying theme of cooperation and participation needs to be paramount. Hilton Head just yesterday received more accolades of being a world-class destination. I urge you to take that into consideration as we look at changing how visitors can experience that in phase 2 of this project. As a rental community, we want to assist and advise in any way possible for you and both town council for the goal of compliance by visitors and owners. Please remember, when the pandemic started, there was a swift reaction to shut down short-term rentals and it was quickly repealed. The real story was that as a community, business leaders from all industries came together to create the path forward through the Hilton Head Island Bluffton Chamber of Commerce. With my involvement with the VRMA, the Vacation Rental Management Association, that plan was adopted as Safe Community, the international opening standards for destinations. We have an opportunity now, my point is, as a world-class destination, to take the time and make this process something that can be used all around the world to create fair and reasonable regulations for our entire island community and our visitors. So again, I ask that more time is taken to be able to review and make these most recent changes to the ordinance be evaluated quickly so that we all have the ability to review and make sure it's the best path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew.
Ed Bray, Mr. Bray.
May I wait until after the ordinance?
Absolutely. Richard Ross
I'd like to wait till after the presentation, please.
and Misha Ross.
I'm going to wait.
Perfect. That concludes appearance by citizens, sir.
Thank you, Krista. Appreciate that. New business, a summary of the 2021 trolley service and request for input on the proposed 2022 trolley service. Mary Lou,
Hello,
good to see you again.
good to see you. So I just wanted to let you know that we did update the presentation. The one you had in your packet was dated in February. So this, what I'm going to show you might be just a little bit different.
Okay.
Okay. That's up, right? So we're very proud of our trolley 4 seasons of operation, and just wanted to highlight how far we've come in the 4 years that we've been running the trolley. And the different things that we've accomplished in those 4 years, and then what we're planning for this year. And this is a marketing sheet that pretty much shows a lot of the highlights. 52,000 passengers was pretty impressive. Our highest year before that was 18,000, and so, or 8,000. So for us to go to 52,000, it was pretty impressive. I know I got out on the street and observed a lot of the trolley operation, and there were people in the trolleys. They were packing them up and getting on at Shelter Cove and Caligny as our 2 highest spots. I did put in, if you averaged about 3 people per vehicle, roughly 15,000 vehicle trips, if you took each trip and said, oh, well, maybe 3 people would be in a vehicle. So we wanted to be conservative and not say that that was 52,000 vehicle trips, but we say 15. The return on investment we use is the APTA model that says for every dollar invested, there's $5 of return on investment, and I included that study in the packet that you got. And last year, we did implement the Mid-Islands route, and we have some modifications we're proposing for this year. It was 18,000. So here's our ridership history, and you can see the 52,000, I think, had a lot to do with having that Mid-Island route and the connection and the 3 previous years of marketing and outreach. So here is the route map as it existed last year, and our top stops. I believe y'all have looked at that, but you can see that number 1, Shelter Cove, and number 8, Caligny Circle, are the 2 highest, followed by the Weston and, where's the other one? The Harbor, I don't even see it up there, but, yeah, Shelter Cove Harbor, there you go. And so that does show that, the Weston was a great addition. And you can see the other ridership is spread out between the stops. And this is Brian. If you want to speak to the social media, Brian is our Director of Marketing, and he does a fantastic job.
Thank you. For the record, Brian Sullivan, I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications for the Lowcountry Regional Transportation Authority. Last year saw a dramatic increase in our presence online, which includes a lot of, obviously, social media, but also website and even Google. I'm sure you've heard of it. The increase in Facebook followers I thought was pretty compelling. I used a comparison all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic, basically to kind of get you a feel for how things played out over the course of 2 years. And we were roughly around 600 followers on Facebook, and as of today, somewhere in the 1,600 range. So we've nearly tripled our following on Facebook. And couple that, most importantly, something, an analytic that I watch a lot is where are those people? Our first year or 2, they were mostly local. Right now, though, we're a 2 to 1 split, 65% basically following us from outside the area, which is one of those key markets that's really hard to address. So Instagram's very similar. And then just kind of a recent statistic, this is new to this packet. The Google profile for the trolley in the last month has seen a 300% increase in phone calls that folks have placed directly from the Google search. that sounds like a lot. It's not a huge in terms of numbers, but it's a big percentage jump in 1 month's time, and speaks to the anticipation of the trolley season in 2022, and a 41% similarly in profile views, and that's the Google profile. So a lot of those folks then go onto the website or they go to seek social media information.
Go ahead.
Kind of coupled with that is how we enhance the brand that is Hilton Head, right? How do we contribute to the experience? One of the first things, we just received this quote the other day, an unsolicited comment via social media from a resident. And I thought it was important to play it out here because we hear this all the time. I hear it all the time from both visitors, but also residents. This is an individual who's been here 41 years and is really obviously complimentary of the service. So we live for that. I know I do. But more importantly, we do some other things too that I think are even more or maybe equally as important as the economic benefit. And the first thing we have to do is be safe and courteous. Transportation people don't like to talk about their safety record because they feel like they're going to jinx it, but we have had 0 injury incidents or accidents since we started service, which it's a lot of miles to be able to say that. So we're very proud of that, and very, very few actually any kind of preventable incidents as well. But in addition to all that, that's sort of the baseline, right? You have to do that or no one's going to ride. We've added in 2021 the video monitors on each of the trolley vehicles. Right now it's used for promotional purposes only to promote things that we think really tell the story of Hilton Head and can really educate those folks who are on our trolleys, especially if they're there for the first time. We are definitely a part of the island community. It's the 3 Ps, parades, promotions, and partnerships. So we are out there as much as we possibly can be as a public transit agency to make sure that we're a part of the community. And lastly, it's one of the things that's kind of a moving target right now with the supply chain issues and technology developments and things of that nature. But we're always looking at ways that we can enhance the green vehicle technologies and make our operation as green as possible. Supply chain's playing a number on that type of stuff right now, but we're always trying to look at that kind of stuff, and we've always tried to stay ahead of the latest and greatest so that we can present the most environmentally friendly perspective.
So our season for 2022 would start April 9th. It's the Saturday of Heritage Week prior to the Heritage. That was when we started earlier than that, we found that week, the Heritage Week, was our biggest week for the month of April. And so we targeted that as our start date. It'll be the same schedule as last year. We'll continue the fare free. And we have a couple of route adjustments we wanted to go over as well. Looking at the routes, we evaluate the routes every year, and we talk to staff as well as far as what enhancements. And I have to say I've had many requests for service along Pope Avenue prior to this year. And one of the indicators in transit is if you're within a quarter mile of a bus stop, you're served by that stop. And so that kind of showed that area of Pope Avenue that they were walkable to the stops. Well, with the opening of the Lowcountry Celebration Park and the Sandbox Museum, we saw an opportunity to have a very desirable location on our maps and schedules and to promote to the folks riding the bus. And so on the left side is the current route. On the right side is our proposed change. And what we would do is we would move stop 7 to right in front of the Sandbox Museum, but on Nassau Road, because we can get in and out of there fairly quickly. We would not go into the Celebration Park. If anybody wanted to go to the park, they would get off at the Sandbox. We'd come around the front. The next stop would be back to Coligny Circle, where we've already served. And then stop 9, what we would like to do, and we're still working on the details, but get off of Pope Avenue and go into the road right in front of the Courtyard Hotel there, have a stop there for that whole south end that aren't walking over to Coligny. To where the beach is. And so that would be the stop for that. And then we'd move on, and stop 10 would be just opposite Cordilla Parkway, where it comes out. We'd have another stop there, again, with the same thing in mind, that folks in that general area could get to that stop. We feel like we're going to enhance our ridership without really losing any of the current riders, as the new route is only a slight modification. I think we'll get more riders and more destinations. We also have some suggestions for the Mid-Island route. We've been talking to people and seeing what people want for transportation, and in Port Royal, the manager there is very excited about us having the ability to come in through from the Westin and then out Port Royal. And he would like us to serve the clubhouse there and again the Island Links complex. So that's what we want to do. We want to bring the trolley back instead of the small cutaway, have it only go one time an hour on Folly Field Road, and then go out through Port Royal. And here's the two maps that you can see. The left map is the current map, and then the right map is the one going through Port Royal.
Are we supposed to be asking questions as we go, or?
Let's
hold them? Okay.
We're currently in the middle of our Hilton Head Island Airport feasibility study. We're just doing a study right now at this point. We have consultants out of Savannah that hit the ground running and have had many meetings to discuss the need for transportation at the airport. We have a lot more passengers than we have vehicles to get them around. And so they're in the middle of the study. They put a survey out. They've got over 200 responses to the survey. This study should be complete within the next 30 to 45 days. And then we'll have the results of what they're recommending. And this is where we're at with the airport study. We've had several stakeholder meetings. They've gotten a lot of data collected. They've been on the ground, the consulting firm actually going to hotels and going to rental agencies and talking to people and just initiating that conversation of what do people want to see. So I'm really interested to see what they come up with, because they've spent a lot of time and hours, asking people. That's that. You have questions?
Yes, I'm sure we do. Ms. Becker, would you like to begin with any questions or comments?
Sure. Hi, and thank you. It was a great report. I'd be interested in, when I saw the 300% phone calls coming into y'all, I was curious as to anecdotally what kind of questions they have for you.
They're mostly, when is the service starting?
Oh.
It's been like that since October. How soon can we take a trip?
I guess a follow-up question is there a tracking of whether those are visitors, tourists, or residents on the island?
It's almost all visitors.
It's almost all visitors. I'd be interested, and I guess we'll get to this at some point, with regard to funding, seeing that the report showed that it would continue to be fare-free. So that was certainly something that I would be interested in hearing a little bit more. The rerouting through Folly Field and Port Royal. Currently, we have that smaller bus, which the neighborhoods, the residential neighborhoods have requested. And so I'm assuming that we maintain that smaller, quieter bus through that route.
We're recommending going back to the trolley and mitigating that person's complaint with not going twice an hour, but only going once an hour through that Folly Field Road corridor. They would go to the Westin and then they wouldn't come back. Mm-hmm. And I think, I remember last year in that complaint. The experience of the trolley really is the trolley itself, riding in the trolley and what a scenic view you get of Hilton Head, the monitors we have up with the information playing on what's happening on the island. And we felt like the experience that we're trying to give to the visitors and to the residents here is best given with the actual trolley vehicle. So we recommend putting it back.
So there was more than one complaint. It was complaints. But following up on that and adding to the information that the large majority of phone calls that y'all receive are from visitors, I think that I have to stay very consistent and responsible to the residents of this island, and they're my first priority. So I am going to ask strongly that our council continue to put that smaller vehicle going through that residential neighborhood, whether it's once or twice, the impact to those residents is substantial day after day. So thank you for your report with that caveat to that we keep that smaller bus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. Just a few things. My first interest is in marketing, and Brian, I understand that you're trying to go into the social world here and gain some interest. If you don't have the answer, that's fine. I'm just curious as to how much dollars we're talking about as far as a marketing budget is concerned with the program. Can you give me a figure or?
You're kind of looking at the budget. It's
Okay.
mostly labor. There is some costs. We do, for example, this year we're doing a more robust rider's guide, and that's going to be paid for through advertising, so advertising businesses along the route, and obviously businesses that pertain to the visitors for the most part, but also residents. Additional budget, I mean, we have capital budgets for things that can assist with capital items. In fact, we were having a meeting earlier this morning talking about sort of a wish list of things to help take advantage of some of the capital funds that are available to us.
Well, and I could address the budget in saying we operate on a very shoestring budget for pretty much everything. And so Brian's salary is the majority of our marketing money. And we did pay, if you look on the website, there's videos. We paid for some of the video production and drone shots. We did pay for that. That was a one-time cost. But the cost of marketing for the current year is we don't spend a lot of money on marketing, probably less than $10,000 on the things that we purchase.
Okay, this is something that I'm, I guess, looking for consideration from council. With that being said, I think the Trolley service has become a part of our community, okay? And we all know that one item, parking in particular on Hilton Head, is a premium. And the more times that we can offer folks not to get in the vehicle to go somewhere, the better off we are, all right? So as we pride ourselves as being somewhere that you can come and visit, a nice wide beach, I think we need to also pride ourselves in the fact that we have a transportation system that can move people around. So if we can be creative with some of our ATAX dollars, okay, and have a deeper conversation with our good friends over at the chamber as far as marketing is concerned, I think that will serve us well in the future. You mentioned capital needs. I remember having a conversation about our stops, and I understand that you're going to potentially add a few more stops. Currently, they are, I guess, just a poll with some information, but enhancing those to a degree, I think, is something that we need to consider. Them being more of a comfort station than just a stop, maybe a bench or something. There's a high expectation when you come to Hilton Head, okay? So I think we want to offer that along the way. And the last thing that I'll mention, I appreciate us having a study with the airport, and we all know the troubles we had there last year. But I would also want us to consider how we can partner with Pamela Breeze when it comes to emergencies, okay? I'm not sure if we currently have a MOU with them as far as transporting folks off of the island in the occurrence of hurricane evacuation.
We have an MOU with Beaufort County where we are the transportation providers during emergencies. And we do provide a bus on Hilton Head that we load to take to the shelter, but we also give the fire department one of our vehicles to use. And they use our vehicle to go around the island, either to take people to a shelter or to take them to the bus that we have staged. But we're willing to do, if the plans need to modify, we're there for you.
Okay, sounds good. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the report. My observation is that there are a couple of reasons for your success. Actually, three come to mind. Number one is free fares. Obviously, that is, I think, the thing that stimulated this all going. Number two would be the trolleys themselves, which are attractive and clean and modern without being too bus-like, if you will. And probably most importantly is the friendly drivers that you have. They are excellent. They are full of information. If you want to talk about things, they'll talk to you. If you want to be left alone, they'll leave you alone. But they always do that with a smile. And so I, for one, appreciate that, and I'm sure that all of the people that are using the service appreciate that. I'm concerned about your initial comments about moving the buses back through Folly Field. At this time, Folly Field is in my ward. I've heard from a number of citizens with complaints about noise and smells and so forth, and you tried to deal with that by getting the smaller vehicle. People were pleased with that. And so I would suggest that unless the demand for service is greater than the size of a van, that you consider staying with the vans for the time being. Certainly not an order on my part. I don't have the ability to do that, but it is a practical suggestion based upon what I have heard from some of my constituents there. And I know you've heard the same thing, and you've tried to respond to that. I think the changes in the routing that you've suggested sound very good. I'm sure the people in Folly Field will appreciate that, because there won't be a two-way pass going through there with whichever vehicle you're using. And so I think you've got some really good ideas here. I want to see the use of the trolley continue to grow, and I know you do too. We have, as has been mentioned, we've got major parking issues here, and using a mass vehicle, if you will, solves an awful lot of those problems and makes it easier for us to manage and make it available to our tourist friends. My observation about the use of the trolley is I'm not sure who those people are. That is, I don't know how many are family groups. I don't know how many are people that have driven in and have parked the car and want to ride the shuttle to Coligny or to Shelter Cove or whatever. It would be useful to have some of that data so that we can consider how to alter the route, increase the routes and so forth. So some additional information like that would be very useful to us in working with you on a partnership basis to continue to provide this service for the benefit of our community. Thank you for being here. Thank you for an excellent report and a great program.
Thank you, Glenn. Brian and Mary Lou, it's like old time's sake here. I really appreciate the update in your ideas, but I also appreciate following my colleagues up here because I think they made a number of really good points. I would agree with Glenn that the drivers of your vehicles really make the difference. And I've been pleased when I've ridden the trolleys in that regard. As I ride the trolley, because I know where everything is, I sort of see the information go by me and I know how to interpret it. But for guests who are on the island, it's also an opportunity to in a sense, answer the question, what am I looking at? Mm-hmm. And that gets me to the videos and other ways of describing what the buses, what the trolley's passing. And I just don't know if there's any conceivable way a driver could become more of a tour guide or something that is not only educational from the video standpoint, but also audible. So that's just an idea. I mentioned video, and you do have videos available. How do we expand the number of videos that we can air on the trolleys? Is that going to nonprofits on the island? Is
Currently, it's all cultural and arts. We have a promotional video for the trolley. We have an overview of Palmetto Breeze for what it's worth, about 2 minutes, a little less than 2 minutes. But the rest of it is all Culture HHI, the Gullah Museum, Mitchellville, things like that. So expanding it, as far as I'm concerned, the quickest way to do that is if folks have readily available short, I would encourage short vehicles with as little audio as possible.
Well,
Because we
are
don't
you,
wanna put the audio
Brian,
on.
are you dealing with Jen McEwen
Oh,
or
yes.
Carolyn Grant?
Oh, yes, very much so.
I'd reconnect with that with a request, answering the question, how can we expand the choices of videos?
Sure, absolutely. Will do.
Mr. Ames, I do know last year that Brian, we had a pause because not all that video is closed captioned, and we made the decision we didn't want audio, but we
Yeah.
wanted the closed caption, and so he had to get the.
No, I appreciate that.
video
Yeah, I
closed
remember
captioned.
that. Mr. Brown mentioned the marketing aspect, and it really, what that boils down in my head is how do we leverage your one person to the chamber, to the town website, to PD, to Sea Pines, and so on. And I'm just looking for a way that with a little bit of effort, that information can go to a number of different places.
Yeah, I think I've been in public transportation for close to 30 years, and this is by far the most welcoming community I've ever been in from a public transportation standpoint. And I'm not saying that to compliment us or the community, it's just true. And so it's so easy to go in and, the town, the chamber, the local businesses are amazingly receptive. And so we can do a lot with just one staff person, if you will, because that communication and that partnership works. There's definitely probably some things we could do. There are advertising opportunities, promotional opportunities that I would love to take advantage of.
Yeah, Brian, you don't have to go into the details today. I'm just challenging you
Absolutely,
to take the next step.
absolutely, will do.
Every year, I think the committee asks the question, what's the connection to PD and to Sea Pines shuttles and trolleys? Has that been integrated in any
I met with Sea Pines in the first couple of years, and we looked at it, and I actually redesigned the route and the timetables and everything, and it turned out that Trolley Stop 1 that I was designing for is the overflow lot. So upon a subsequent meeting, it was discovered that that's not really a good connection, that we have to come all the way in to the shopping center area there, and that's about 15 minutes in and 15 minutes out, and in my opinion, that would be its own route. Because if you took everybody on the trolley to Sea Pines and back every time they went down that corridor, it would be a very long ride. And so I don't have an answer without either Sea Pines driving people out or us having an additional route going in and out.
Okay, so is that a town responsibility to pursue, or is that something that we can request Palmetto Breeze to pursue? I'm just looking at Park Plaza and then Shelter Cove as two obvious places for a connection to be made, and I haven't tried to answer all the questions.
I will reach back out.
Okay.
And see if the temperatures change any as far as what they're willing to do, and
Okay.
I'll have that report.
Okay, thank you, Mary Lou. You have recommended a couple of changes in the routing. Has that lengthened the trip from one extreme to the other?
It's about the same time.
Okay.
And that's what we look for, because the trolley's on a tight schedule. We can't really add a lot of time without changing all of it.
Yeah.
Right now, we have 30-minute service on anywhere you are on the trolley, and that's an ideal.
Okay, all right. Mr. Brown also mentioned upgrading the signage, or whatever you want to call the place where people are standing. I think that may be something that the town would want to look into, because a combination of a place to sit and some shade, and I don't know what that looks like, but to me, that's a commitment to transportation and hospitality that we ought to be looking into.
Typically, those are done in a partnership with the transit agency and whatever the locale is, and we're more than willing partner in that.
Okay, that's great. Those are my comments, and I really appreciate, Mary Lou, the work that you and Brian are doing, and also welcome the route changes. I think they're going to make a difference for us. Do you have any other comments for us? Hearing none, thanks very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
The second item on new business is a review and discussion of the proposed ordinance concerning short-term rentals. Ann, welcome, and thank you for your dedication to this intractable challenge.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Ann Siren, and I'm the interim comprehensive planning manager for the town. Thank you. I'll go through my presentation, which is largely what is published in the packet, and pause to make some notes. As the committee is aware, staff is proposing some revisions to the draft ordinance as it appears in your packets, in your packet materials. And I'd like to, again, give the majority of the presentation. I'll pause to note where the changes are. These are in response to input that we've received in discussion with the public, with property management companies, with the committee members, and with the town attorney. They were also informed by the fact that the town is pursuing a contract with a company that will provide several services related to short-term rentals, including permitting, monitoring, and enforcement. The primary change related to the ordinance would be that we would remove the requirement to post a sign with a phone number outside of the short-term rental properties. And I'll mention that in a minute, and why that need would go away. The other two changes that we're proposing are a small change regarding pool safety and parking, a couple of changes there. And I'll note this in the presentation. I think that we are very close to what we've been talking about this entire time throughout the entire process. We are closer to what the committee requested and what we've heard from the public. Our recommendation is if we can get agreement and approval from the committee, that we would bring forward a polished ordinance for first reading to Town Council on Tuesday, March 15th. Okay. So we'll review the project purpose statement briefly in the revised timeline. We'll review short-term rental listings and trends, brief summary of public engagement, and then spend some time on the draft ordinance, discuss the effective date and next steps, and discuss issues for further review, the prioritization of those issues, and the next steps regarding those issues. So again, your project purpose statement is that the island has a number of short-term rental units, and the lack of an ordinance has led to that imbalance between residential and resort districts and the elimination of some long-term single-family neighborhoods. So this ordinance and the next steps that we're looking at are an attempt to address those issues. This is our original project timeline, and we will develop a timeline for the remainder of the short-term rental initiative based on the committee's direction. Some short-term rental information is available here for you. You can see an increase in the number of short-term rental listings prior to the start of the pandemic. Here, this ranges from July 2019 to January 2022. Now, this is not as significant as previous estimates were given. It's a little bit of a moving target to estimate the number of short-term rentals. Different companies have different estimates based on when they gather the information. If you're not engaged with the short-term rental monitoring company, they will give you a monthly estimate. And some of those estimates are based on 2 of the major companies, and some are based on more than that. So we can see, though, throughout the companies that we've looked at and the information that we have, there isn't a trend in the increase. Now, it's decreased slightly, and it seems to have leveled out. And as we move forward, we'll be able to provide you with more concrete numbers. But at this point, we've kind of held steady at slightly over 9,500 short-term rentals, and that does vary seasonally as well. Public engagement is ongoing. As I mentioned, we are taking comments. We took comments on the draft and are making some proposed changes on that. We're through the majority of our first round of public engagement, and the methods of engagement to date are listed there. And we're all familiar with the meetings that were held and our survey and the responses that we received. So our draft ordinance includes definitions and then standards for permits, property management, safety, noise control, trash storage and disposal, parking, posting the required materials, and enforcement. And regarding enforcement, I just wanted to make a couple of notes. The town's municipal code does currently include regulations on parking, on noise, on littering, and those are being enforced. In fact, I was just speaking with Josh Gruber, who mentioned that citations were just issued for a parking violation in the Mid-Island area this week. So we are enforcing those regulations. Just because the effective date of the ordinance is January 1st doesn't mean that we won't be enforcing violations that come before us. And that includes not just folks who are violating the ordinance, but if there is an issue with a short-term rental being a public nuisance that rises to that level, because short-term rentals need business licenses as of January 1st, that's something that we can pursue to either suspend or revoke a business license. Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on definitions because it's a little bit of a moving target. I think there's some recommendations to refine these slightly, but effectively, what is a short-term rental that's being used? Our definition, the one thing to note here is that that would be less than 30 consecutive days would be the definition of a short-term rental. We may change from domicile to a different definition, depending on whether that's advisable for the town attorney. Short-term rental period means the time that you're renting, and the agent is a person who is authorized on the owner's behalf to take care of violations and manage the property. Okay. So how will short-term rental owners comply with these standards? So our method that we're looking at right now is that folks would apply for a short-term rental permit. That's where they would affirm the statements in a list. I affirm that I meet this requirement. I affirm that I meet this requirement. I affirm that I have this many parking spaces. Once the permit is obtained, that would be a separate from the business license application. But you would need a short-term rental permit to operate a short-term rental use. That would be starting on January 1st, and you would have a separate business license. Okay, for the standards for property management, these are listed that the short-term rental owner or their agent will be available to respond. They can be available by phone or physically respond. Now, what we're proposing, and I mentioned that we're looking at a company that would provide some solutions via software. And one of those solutions is, and would eliminate, actually, let me advance to the next slide, number 5. So we're proposing, staff is proposing to eliminate this requirement from the draft ordinance. That we received a lot of feedback from the public. People were concerned about having a phone number. Folks said, you know, I don't want a sign outside of my house advertising as a short-term rental, that's dangerous. A lot of communities use a company that will basically process complaints. And so they're kind of a middleman. The town is pursuing a contract with just such a company. And what that would look like is there would be a 24-hour-a-day available phone number with a person on the other end who would take phone calls and complaints. They would log the complaint, and then they would contact the owner or property manager of record as provided by the town. And that person would respond to the complaint. There are different ways that you can configure the service. What we would recommend is that after an hour, the person who lodged the complaint, if they agree to it, is contacted back by that company and asked, has your complaint been resolved? That's not necessary, but it's a available service. That information, again, will be logged by the company. If it is not resolved, then each municipality has the option of what to do then. Either that information is saved and forwarded at the time given to the municipality. It can be forwarded on to a police department. It can be forwarded to code enforcement. However the municipality wants to handle enforcement at that point. But that information is saved and logged. You can also make a complaint on a website. Fill out a web form with your information. And the advantage of that also is that you can attach photos, video, and evidence of what the complaint is. And all of that is logged and recorded. So the town would have access to all of those complaints, the person who complained, the address, the time, what the nature of the violation is, and all of the accompanying evidence of that complaint. So that does away with the need to have the person who's complaining go out, look at what the phone number is, call the person directly, either the owner or the property manager, and make their complaint. It also has the advantage of having a log of all that information. We can put that on a map. We can see where the problem areas are. Also, if we have repeated issues with a certain address, we have all that information available to us if we need to pursue further code enforcement action. Okay. For standards for safety, these have not changed since you last looked at them. Just some basic safety standards to have smoke and carbon monoxide detector, a fire extinguisher, and escape routes. This has changed. Our recommendation is that we, instead of having one of two required safety options for a pool or a hot tub, that we include in the short-term rental permit a statement that the owner affirms that they will notify all renters prior to booking that the property has a pool or hot tub, or they have access to a pool or hot tub, and what those safety elements are that are in place. Because it could be a variety of things. It could be that they have a fence, it could be a screen enclosure, it could be a magnetic latch with a door that closes automatically, or a pool alarm. So that way the consumer is notified. If you have small children and you're concerned about their safety, you will know before you book, because the owner will give you that information, what safety options are available. For noise control, our recommendations haven't changed since we included this in the packet. This is a notification in the rental unit that it is unlawful to disturb the peace of others, and that there are quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And that will be communicated in writing to the person renting the unit prior to the start of the rental period. Regarding trash storage and disposal, this also hasn't changed from what was included in your packet materials. Basically, the owner or the manager will affirm on their application that trash is screened, that it's managed, that any spills are taken care of, and that the cans or containers aren't left out outside of pickup days. Okay. For parking, we made a couple of we have a couple of recommended changes from what we're proposing in your packet materials. So what we're recommending is that on the short-term rental application, the owner or the property manager, whoever makes the application, will state the number of improved parking spaces that are available on site. Our parking standards in the LMO for a standard space are 9 feet by 18 feet. Obviously, in some cases, you have folks who park in a row instead of next to each other. So they need to measure out how many vehicles can fit on the site in an improved space and affirm that on their short-term rental application. We're also recommending that that information be provided to the renter prior to booking, so that you know if you're booking a short-term rental and you know that you have 5 different families traveling down in separate cars, and that rental can only accommodate 4 parking spaces, that you need to figure some other way to get to the rental, or you need to figure out what to do with that 5th car. Another change that we're recommending is that the number 3, that the first portion of that sentence, maintain a system to ensure compliance with this paragraph, is maintained, but that the second portion of that sentence is deleted, including but not limited to parking passes or placards. That was something we heard negative feedback from a lot of folks saying, I understand that having a pass does give some weight to the idea of we have a system in place, you need to abide by the system, but folks felt it was overly bureaucratic. So we are recommending eliminating that requirement. Regarding point number 4, so the intent is to ensure that you don't have any vehicles parked off-site, and that includes an adjacent rights-of-way during the short-term rental period. We know some folks will say, like if you're having a party at your house, you can say to your next door neighbor, hey, we're having a party. I know you're going to be out this weekend. Do you mind if I park a few vehicles in your driveway? There are some folks who may have a friendly relationship with their neighbor and may want to park extra vehicles on their driveway, and they can allow that. We've heard some folks say that happens so infrequently, we don't need to have this requirement in there. At the direction of the commission or the committee, we can take out that second sentence based on your feeling on that. Okay. The requirement for posting required materials has not changed, or we're not recommending any changes since that was posted in your packet. We're recommending that there be either town-provided materials, it's up to the owner. It will have attractive information about the island and welcoming folks and saying, here are the expectations that you have. A lot of communities have that. Some folks have said, I already provide most of that information. I'll provide all of it, I just want to do it in my own aesthetic way. And if they affirm that they'll provide that and post that in the rental unit, they'll meet that requirement. Otherwise, you can use some of the town-provided materials. Again, our goal is voluntary compliance through education, and the town allows enforcement both for individuals who are violating an ordinance and for the owner of a business who is not meeting the standards for that business. And I just want to give an example that was given to me of a bar. Maybe you have a busy bar with a number of patrons who are a little rowdy, and we will enforce if there are violations where the patrons are rowdy, those will be enforced. If you have a repeat violation where you always have fights every weekend at this bar, at that point, we have the opportunity to either suspend or revoke that business license. It's kind of the same theory, and we would use the same enforcement mechanisms that are currently in the municipal code and enforce these standards the same way. We recommend the effective date of the ordinance be January 1st, 2023. This will give us sufficient time to implement the software solution, give us time to do public education, and give a lead time for folks to get their permits in place before January 1st, 2023. Okay. And again, if the committee supports the ordinance either as originally presented or with the revisions that we're recommending, we can bring forward a final ordinance to Town Council on March 15th. And I would ask if you have any questions, anything I can clarify before moving on to the issues for further review and their prioritization.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Ms. Becker?
Thank you, Ann. Just picking up on, I have a bunch of notes here. So in the beginning of the presentation on page 8, you mentioned one of the changes had to do with domicile. And I'm not really sure what that change would be, what the difference,
Sure.
what you meant.
The feedback that we received from the town attorney is that domicile is probably less advantageous than using short-term rental property and slightly changing the definition. I'd be happy to bring up the definitions that he recommends on the screen for your review. Substantively, there wouldn't be any change. It's just a better way to define short-term rental property instead of using domicile.
So the definition is the same, it's just the term.
It would be a slightly different definition, but it would be the same, the effect would be the same, that it's a place that's rented for less than 30 days. Would you like me to bring up the definition on the
Sure.
screen? Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Oops. I don't know, I have a white screen there. Do I have to close it and reopen it? Okay, I apologize. I have to close this and reopen it for you. Thank you. So we are recommending, so short-term rental property versus domicile was recommended by the town attorney. And you can see the time period there is the same. Specifies it's within the town limits, it's offered for whole and in part under lease or any kind of form of agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So that was that question. So I think that I'm just going to try to go down in no particular order, just how I've wrote down my notes. The changes to the short-term rental signs or the notification, I don't really have an issue with that. I do find it interesting, though, that as I took a survey, informal, of my own driving around, many of the short-term rental properties already have signs in front of them. So that already exists. I don't know if we have any statistics that would indicate that, in fact, those houses with the signs are really more likely to be broken into or have those types of criminal behavior that we've been hearing a bit about.
I did request that information from the Beaver County Sheriff's Office. I have not yet received a response to date, but
Okay.
yes.
So instead of those signs, there would be a sign that indicated the service provider's number,
I believe
email address, website?
I believe the intent is to not have any sort of sign requirement at all. The sign code, as you mentioned, currently does allow folks, if you have a short-term rental and you have a company and you want to say, this offer, and this was, I think, especially helpful pre-Google and pre-booking websites, this is offered by, Vacation, Hilton Head, and a phone number. And so, as you mentioned, a lot of folks do have that sign. The intent is that we would encourage, not require, but encourage folks who have a short-term rental to have that complaint information in the unit, because it's not just residents who are affected by noisy neighbors, it could also be renters.
Sure.
And then that the town would promote and let full-time residents, especially those living in areas with short-term rentals, know we have a phone number, there's a 24-hour hotline, you can also do it on the website. We have a link on My HHI app where you can log your complaint, so that through education, we would make people aware of here's how you log your complaint about short-term rentals.
So I think the key there is that education piece, and that it be prominently displayed, because that is one of the biggest complaints that we hear often, is we don't know who to contact. We call the town, there's no one there, it sits in an answering machine, no one picks up their email. We call the sheriff's department, they say it's not something we can necessarily attend to at this time, our code, and on and on and on. So the point being that people need to have an easy access, whether it's a visitor who's not happy with, the surroundings, or if it's our residents who are being impacted, have an easy access to that information. I've made my point with that. And I just want to say with that, there's been a lot of discussions, and I read through all the public comments that we received today. I sat in and listened to 90%, if not almost all but one, of the stakeholder meetings that you held, and thank you for the good work that you did. Incredibly impressive. And one of the things that I want to point out is that when you are a visitor and you come and you're having a really good time, everyone wants that. We want to welcome our visitors. We want them to have a good time. The issue comes in that our residential neighborhoods, where people have built their lives and have an anticipation of the quality of peace that they get to enjoy. It's not like a neighbor who has a party once, twice, maybe a year, who's notified you and said, hey, I'm having guests over, there may be a little extra noise, come join us, have a drink, whatever. There may be some extra cars, and it's over and done. This is from literally March, because the complaints have already started, to October, with that day in, day out, week after week, month after month, the residents in the neighborhood are experiencing those noisy conditions, the parking conditions, and that don't just happen for a set time of a party. It literally happens sometimes almost 24 hours a day in some residents. And so those are the types of concerns that people have been asking. Well, we maintain our property, this doesn't happen, that is the concern. It's the residents' quality of life every day living here on Hilton Head Island. I'd also like to just say, in connection to that I have a concern that we haven't addressed, and that's that within residential neighborhoods, there are homes that are exclusively used as a business enterprise, not just one, but often many, and those owners or investors in that business enterprise are nowhere to be found. And so I wonder, in the long run, what does that do to our residential communities if we as a town prioritize bringing in, we all know that our visitors oftentimes become our residents, but if we're interested in building our residential communities, bringing in young families, continuing to grow Hilton Head as a place to live, work, and play, then how do we identify where a residential neighborhood where someone will want to do that is? If it's being overrun by business enterprises, how do I sell my property? How do you sell your property as a residential neighborhood when it's literally engulfed in short-term rentals. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. That's the impacts of what we're dealing with. And so I think that that's important for us all to remember, that the goal is truly what's best for the residents of Hilton Head, short-term and long-term. So house plan permit, I'm concerned about the parking and the way that we have it currently in this particular ordinance. I know that on some of, and I think it's been addressed, or at least it has in one-ish instance, but there are some short-term rentals that are actually advertising if there's not enough parking on site, you can use one of the neighboring parks or areas where you can place your car. And you might think, oh, okay, well, at night, no one's parking there, so an extra couple of cars parked in those spaces is okay. But it's not just at night. It's during the entire stay. It could be 24 hours a day. Those parking spaces taking up valuable space for folks who want to play soccer or go to the beach or whatever the case, go to dinner, whatever the case may be. The list is long. So those are some of my concerns with regard to parking. I also want to point out, just to correct the record, that in our Public Planning Committee comment report, I always love it when people use my name and get it wrong. So I'm going to correct the record on that. One of the comments here says that I mentioned situations where I have friends over and that they have to park on the street. Let me assure anyone in this room or who is listening, and for the record, my visitors never have to park on the street. I have more than adequate parking, and I have 2 vacant lots that I own. So if I don't mind if you use my name, but get the facts straight and don't put false information out there about that. The process to file the complaint, I'm interested in hearing more of that service. January 1st, 2023 as a start date leaves this summer and this rental season wide open for the concerns that we've heard repeatedly about across the island, without those residents having any area to go for satisfaction. And so that's a concern to me that would start this in January 1st, 2023, instead of for this season in some way. So those are some of my comments. I may take the opportunity at some other point to bring up others, but I know there's people on this dais who'd also like to share.
Mr. Brown?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Aaron, for what you've put in front of us thus far. Can you help me with, I'm still struggling a little bit with the difference between applying for a business license and applying for the permit. I understand that there's certain elements that we want to, I guess, put a little extra layer on in terms of short-term rentals. But are there any other examples of the type of businesses within the town of Hilton Head that also require a permit outside of a business license?
Sir, I can't speak to that on my own. John Troyer is here. He may be able to answer that question.
Sorry, John.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. Yes, a couple of things. The business license aspect is for the owners, and it's owner-centered. And the permit is location-centered, so address-centered. And so one owner may have many units. And so we want to make sure that each unit is accounted for. We think of the permits much like a construction permit or a plumbing permit or just that is allowing that activity, and so it would have the same kind of review through the same people who do the regular permit activities. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm more curious as to the draft calls for the permit to be applied for every year. So I'm just curious to know if, I understand the concept of I'm a business owner and I own multiple units. Okay, so the business license may be for my business that covers these units, but you want to make sure that each one of my units is following the rules. I get that part, but I'm not quite sure I'm understanding why we would do that every year.
You would be surprised at how often these units turn over. And so in the last couple of years especially, you can just look at the numbers for the real estate transfer fee. These ownership has changed and transferred a number of times from many, many units within 1 year. And so it's your population is very dynamic, and so it's, you know, you might think, well, okay, one person owns this one unit. Well, oh no, actually that one unit got transferred 3 different times within a year, and okay, you want to know who owns it.
Okay, I get it. I guess I just encourage us to give that a little bit more thought. I'm concerned about it operationally from the town standpoint, keeping up with it, and also from the business owner's perspective, having to apply not just for a business license, but go through that permitting process on units that they may have in their inventory for year after year. The other one, you mentioned that some of the data that we have in front of us are estimates because we haven't gotten the real data from the monitoring service, right? Can you help us with where we are with
Certainly.
contracting with that monitoring service?
Certainly. So the data that I presented is from AirDNA, and we
Okay.
do have a contract with that service. Now, AirDNA monitors Airbnb and VRBO. There are local companies that it doesn't capture, and there are other companies that are not local that it doesn't capture. Using data from AirDNA that's verified, the benefit of that contract is that we have current data. The data that we had previously that we presented to you was an estimate. It wasn't verified by the company that we weren't double counting listings, because that verification process is where it comes to the contract and you pay for that. The limitation of AirDNA is, and it does scrape the websites regularly, it just doesn't cover all of those businesses, so you have to adjust up slightly. That information, we were provided some complimentary verified information from one of the companies that we were able to use. So again, these are the best estimates that we can give you. Over time, the benefit of having that contract is that not only do they scrape multiple times a week the data from the internet instead of monthly, they keep that historical record. So over time, we're going to have even better information for you. Part of the issue is turnover, part of the issue is unverified listings. So you're always going to have a little bit of wiggle room. The further along we get, the better data we're going to have for you. But I think this is fairly solid, especially, also, I just want to mention, the business license department has their own system for verifying. They confirmed that these numbers look about right to them, and the historical trends also look about right to them. So we're trying to use every source we can to give you the best numbers.
Is there any relationship between AirDNA and the potential third party that would be helping us with monitoring the management of, I guess, the expectations of folks?
Sure. That would be a different company. AirDNA doesn't offer that service. They're actually primarily a service that's used by folks who are in the industry to get to know whether they're pricing appropriately, if you want to make an investment, where that investment will be a wise choice. There are a couple of large companies that offer that service. We're looking at both to see which one works best for us. That's one of the companies offers, and they offer a series of modules. So you buy in. The monitoring is typically your first product. You buy the monitoring, and then you can add the modules that you want, including registering. So the registration process, there are a couple different communities that use that, and I was just looking at one locally, and I can't remember which of the communities it was. Glynn County, Georgia was another one. There is a website that goes through the town's website. You go through, Charleston was one of them that use it. And you can configure it however you want, but that's how you would register to get your short-term rental permit. So it goes through registration. It can scrape for enforcement to make sure you know, we give them our business license information. These are the licensed short-term rentals. These 20 don't have permits. They can, if you want, for a price, send out a letter saying, hey, we saw your listing, here's the listing, it's on your letterhead, that violation letter is sent. So there's a number of services we can get, but data monitoring is the basic service.
I asked those two questions because I know that those companies are a lot more intimate in this business than we currently are. We're trying to get there, so leaning on them for best practices, better understanding what's going good, what's going bad, is so important as we develop our ordinances here. And my last question, the revisions that you have pointed out in this presentation, how long has the public had those revisions?
These are presented to the public today, sir.
Today?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, thank you. And many thanks for all of your hard work and for your guidance in leading the town through this process. I do have some concerns. They're not pointed at you. First of all, I would say that I believe, and my experience is, that the vast number of rental property owners are responsible and managing their properties correctly and are helpful when issues arise. I'm also convinced that the vast number of the management companies also provide a valuable service to us and are not causing the problems. Unfortunately, we are faced with what I would call some bad actors, some people that just don't care. And then you have the occupants, the tenants, if you will, who come into these homes, and they're here to have a good time. We understand that. That was the thing that drew most of us here. And so they have to be responsible, though. And so that has forced us into the situation where we need to adopt an ordinance like this. It is not pointed at the responsible property owners. It's not pointed at the responsible management companies that I mentioned before. You've come forward to us today with a number of changes in the ordinance, most of which I've not had the opportunity to read yet. The public hasn't had the opportunity to read those. The interested people in this room haven't had the opportunity to read those. You're proposing that the ordinance take effect January the 1st. I would suggest and I would propose that it is too early for us to be moving this ordinance forward to the council at this time for those reasons. We don't have full disclosure and opportunity to review and comment on all of these various changes that are made in here, some of which are substantive, some of which are clarification, some of which are legal. Being an old lawyer, a recovering lawyer, I understand and I appreciate Mr. Coltrane correcting the issue about a domicile. That is something that is, it was an innocent mistake, but it didn't make any sense in the context that it was being used. So I am ready to move forward after we've had the opportunity to review these changes and after the public has had the opportunity to comment on these changes. I am not prepared to move forward with approving this ordinance to move forward to the council at this time for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. And at the very beginning, you outlined, I think, 3 or 4 different changes. One was a sign, one was pool safety, and was one related parking. I favor the new language regarding the signage because of the town's going towards a company to monitor and enforce and process complaints and so on. And I do like the idea of the log because that gives us the opportunity over time to understand to what degree do we really have a problem. On pool safety, now it's interesting, we're a hospitality town. And if you think of your own situation, when you invite somebody to stay at your house, you want to make them feel comfortable. They know what your expectations are, and secondly, what they would like to experience when they're staying at your house. So there's a sensitivity in both directions. And I see the pool safety issue in that light. To me, we as a community are speaking to the parents who have a 1.5-year-old child. If we say to them, this unit does not have pool safety, be aware of that. Now, you were saying something about defining pool safety and so on, I understand that. But essentially, what we are saying to those parents is that you as a parent can make a decision whether or not this is the right place for your family to stay. So I think that if we are giving prospective renters the information, not only in that regard, but also in parking. Incidentally, this unit only allows X number of parking places, and if you're coming with more cars than that, you might want to make arrangements how you're going to deal with that before you get to the island. Is that important to us as a community? Yeah, it is, because we have to try to balance the impact of tourism and the quality of life for residents. So to me, it has a lot to do with our role as a town in being responsible, caring hosts of people who are coming to our community, so that we alert them to what our expectations are, and we communicate it in a way that we're not bludgeoning them with demands, but in a sense saying, we want you to know what's important to this community. And we're looking forward to having you come to the island, but be aware we have certain things and expectations. And on that basis, I think people come to the island feeling better about what they might learn when they get here. There's some level of expectation of behavior that might be different if we don't have that kind of communication. So what it gets down to for me is how we communicate those expectations and in a style that really speaks to hospitality rather than bureaucracy and standards and so on. Now, some members of the public mentioned that maybe that ought to be the responsibility of the rental management agents. And I understand why that might be best, but I think there has to be some partnership in drafting that so that the broader community expectations are understood, perhaps in the style of that particular company, okay? Does the proposed ordinance, and I may have just overlooked it, actually specify how it is going to limit the number of parking places somewhere? Is it only by that 9 by 18, how many you can fit on your property?
Yes, the requirement was a 9 by 18 improved parking space, and that was to allow for folks to park in a row. The limitation is the number that you can fit on an improved space. And improved, instead of parking on the grass in your yard kind of haphazardly, if you mark out a space, it doesn't need to be impervious, doesn't need to be concrete, but if you use crush run or some other way to note that that is a parking space.
Yeah, because I've got a design background, I see some issues with the looseness of that. And I think it has more to do with a relationship of available land and the number of bedrooms and so on. So I don't have a suggestion on that one, but that's one I'm going to have to think about a little bit.
Yes, sir.
You also mentioned something about off-street parking and a neighbor and so on and so forth. I don't believe that rises to the level of needing language in the ordinance. If a neighbor says to a friend, that's a one-time situation. But, well, let me be clear. I don't think we should be permitting off-site parking. Okay. That the one-time neighborly gesture falls in a different category than the opportunity to utilize on a continuous basis over parking in a certain neighborhood. I've covered what I wrote down for today. I think it would be appropriate at this time to allow the public to speak to us, and then we as a committee can decide what we're going to do.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Ann. Now, we might do this a little bit differently because under normal circumstances, when council is about to take action, any member of public can come up here and speak for 3 minutes, so you don't necessarily, under these circumstances, have to have submitted your desire to speak. So if you want to say something today, regardless of whether or not you have spoken to Krista in advance, you may speak on this matter alone. Yeah, and please identify yourself. Krista, why don't you call the names of the people who have requested?
Yes, sir. Ed Bray.
For the record, Ed Bray, General Manager for Beach Properties. I had prepared a speech, but haven't heard everything. I'm going to kind of just set that aside. First, I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak and for all your hard work with this. I know it's not an easy task at all. Really, the general point is I had heard that there were going to be some revisions to the ordinance, and I had not had the opportunity to see them, and I would urge that we take that under consideration before you do make a vote. In my speech, I discussed or brought up the trash ordinance that was in place a few years back, and one of the things that was clear from that ordinance was that the short-term rental industry was not taken into consideration when that was drafted. And I think it was about 14 months into the program, it was disbanded due to its failure in service in our community. And trash being important here, I think it's important that we as a community work together, not only from the community members, the residents, but the companies itself. I know changes have been made that I think are beneficial, but others could be done as well. We talked, or you folks talked about the Breeze trolley system. You know, something that could be considered, not that it would be in an ordinance, but let's work with the short-term rental companies and put that in our arrival instructions so guests know that that service is there.
Appreciate that.
You know, marketing materials, things of that nature that could go a long way and increase that usage, which would then, you know, decrease the overall traffic and parking issues that we may face. Other issues such as pool, for instance, we require all our properties to have pool signs. Has that been considered rather than put in fencing? Personally, I don't believe that fencing solves the issues, but something in terms of not only in our lease agreement, there's notification that it comes with the pool, but to have signage in the property that is prominently displayed that indicates that the you know, no lifeguards on duty, swim at your own risk, things of that nature. So take into consideration that there are alternatives and more involvement that we do with the community and residents and the industry itself. We can get an ordinance that would be in place that would better fit the community and succeed on all fronts that all community members, residents, and industries would be satisfactory with. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Bray.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Krista?
Richard Ross, please. Mr. Ross.
Hello. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. My name is Rick Ross, and I'm a full-time resident in Folly Field. And I also own short-term rentals also in Folly Field. So I really represent both sides of the argument here. So I just want to give you my view of what I think of the ordinance situation. You know, I go through Folly Field, almost daily on my walks. And I walk through Folly Field because I enjoy the area. It's a nice bedroom community, so to speak. And you know, when I go through my walks, I can always identify where the short-term rentals are and where the long-term residents live. And a lot of people think it's because of, you know, I can find the short-term rentals because there's parked cars everywhere, there's noise everywhere, there's trash everywhere, you know, parties going on. But it's actually really the opposite. When I walk through Folly Field, I see all the short-term rentals are very well kept. They're clean. The yards are mowed. You know, it shows island character, so to speak. These beautiful cottages that have been investors and residents and people that own them have fixed up, and they look beautiful. But then when I go look at all the other houses that are owned by long-term residents, I see, cars parked all over their front yards and unimproved grass, abandoned cars, boats stored in everybody's front yards, makeshift junkyards in people's front yards. And in between all this are these pristine, well-kept short-term rentals. So it's almost the opposite of what everyone seems to be complaining about in the area. I took some photos, which you all can review, but, on my walk, I took some photos, and, here's a short-term rental that is this, beautiful, house. It's well-kept and painted and looks very nice, no trash problems, no nothing. And then the residents next door that are full-time, I have junk boats all over the place on old trailers and multiple cars parked all over the grass in the front yard full-time. You think I'm complaining about all these eyesores in everybody's front yard, but actually I'm not. I'm actually supporting it because these properties bought this bundle of rights when they bought their properties, and they are allowed to have boats and cars parked in the front yards, and along with being a short-term rental. So you have these two properties, a short-term rental and a long-term resident, and this person's exercising their property rights by renting their home. These people are exercising their property rights by having junk boats and makeshift junkyards in their front yard, which is allowed. So just because these people exercise different rights doesn't mean that they don't have the same property rights. When the long-term resident complains about the short-term rental, you propose an ordinance, but the rental house isn't proposing an ugly boat ordinance or a no junkyard in the front yard ordinance or anything like that, but all of the property rights are taken away from a renter, but not away from a long-term resident. So, you're proposing these parking restrictions, so this rental house can only have 2 of my guests there, because I only have 2 18 feet by 9-foot parking spots that are improved, yet this long-term resident can park cars all over the place, which they're doing, and boats and everything else in the grass. So it doesn't seem like it's being applied properly. And I just hope that we decide to use everything that's in place now to regulate noise, parking, and trash without an ordinance taking away property rights.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
And the last one is Kaylee Coward. Ms. Coward? That's all that have signed up, sir.
Okay. Are there other members of the public who would like to address this specific item? Please.
Hi, my name is Kate Kluhl. I'm the Executive Director at Hilton Head Island Beach and Tennis Resort. And I do want to thank Ann for all her hard work and our conversations that we've had in regards to any questions that I may have, and the council and the town of Hilton Head Island. I am curious as to how a initiative like the STR will affect a property such as ourselves. We are 846 units on resort development. We take care of our violations in-house. We take care of our trash in-house, complaints in-house as well. And I have not seen anything where a community like ourselves, which is a mixed use, we have primary residents and we have a lot of short-term residents, and we also have long-term tenants. So I haven't seen where this initiative would affect a property such as ourselves. And I would like to see some more feedback from the town and the council on a situation like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure as this draft is finalized, I would suggest that you talk to Ann directly and have her go through it step by step so that you understand clearly how it might affect your property. My guess is that there's going to be relatively little effect, but those are things that Ann needs to talk to you about.
Thank you, Mr. Ames, and I have heard that. I just have not heard how it's going to be implemented town-wide. And again, most of it doesn't pertain to us, but are we going to be still held to those standards that the rest of the island is going to be held to?
Please talk to Ann.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
And I don't know if I have the opportunity to speak on the trolley. If you needed some feedback, I could give you that. We were the fifth
You have
highest.
a minute and 49 seconds.
Again, 846 units, Hilton Head Island Beach and Tennis Resort. We absolutely support the trolley. It has been a great benefit for both our primary homeowners that live at the resort and also for the visitors that come. I've seen it used for grocery pickup for residents that cannot find an Uber, a taxi, or other rental car because they have come here for a short term. I've seen our homeowners use it. They've used it to go to Shelter Cove. They've used it to go to restaurants down on the Clickney Plaza area. So we are 100% supportive of it, and we are very thankful and grateful for the community to be able to provide that. We would like to see the trolley come back. We were very agreeable, not that we had much input on the route transition and the feel of the residents that do live in the Folly Field area, but we would like to see the trolley come back. I've received a lot of feedback from having the shuttle, and they do like the look and feel of the trolley itself. So thank you all very much.
Appreciate the comments. All right, if there are no other public comments, we'll bring it back. Oh, yes, please, ma'am.
Hello, my name's Ann Walsh, and I am a resident of 12 years in Club Course in Sea Pines. I think that this has been a wonderful meeting, and very informative, and one of the things that has been brought to attention is the need for communication. And I have ideas. I don't really have any per se comments on what has been addressed, but I have ideas. I am pro-tourists. I am pro-full-time residents. I am also pro-peace and living together and having a quality of life for everybody. So I don't want to be put into a category of being this way or that way. I think we can all get along. I also think there's lots of different areas that we have short-term rentals that are not a problem at all. I mean, I think people are worried that own short-term rentals that don't need to be worried because they're probably doing things very appropriately. But there are some areas that are and have been designated as residential, and I'll just use an example of Club Course. We're not near the beach. I mean, it's a good hike to get to the beach, but they are showing up. And I really don't have a specific concern that I've experienced. My concern is it going to grow more and more, and I'm not going to have full-time neighbors. And that's going to be detrimental to my quality of life long-term because I like the idea of having neighbors. So please consider that. But I think one of the issues that was addressed is the communication. Now, if we have a certain area that has been primary residential, then maybe there's a way to communicate to the short-term rental, people that are doing the short-term rentals, that your rental that you are renting is in a neighborhood that has a lot of full-time residents. So you may want to consider these things, okay? And that might be something that Ann could address. That we're talking about signage for pools, signage of this. What about educating the renters that this is a very highly populated area for people that live here long-term? Hence, really watching the hours of noise, watching the parking, because that's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the agents, it's a win for the owners, it's a win for the full-time residents. And I just think it deserves better communication, and maybe we can alleviate problems down the road. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And there are 2 parts to this meeting today. The first was the ordinance. The second was dealing with future emphasis. Do you want to, well, let me make a suggestion that we deal with the first part first and then have you come back up.
Yes, sir.
Are there any further questions of Ann regarding either her presentation or comments from the, okay. You want
Are you going to be asking us for closing comments? I don't
Basic-
have a question for Ann, but
Yeah,
I do have
basically,
2 things on my mind.
yeah.
Yeah. Are you ready? Or are you going?
Well, my sense is of this committee that there's hesitancy to move forward now. Unless somebody feels differently, then I would suggest that we make our closing comments to issues that we want Ann to bring back to us going forward.
Can I just answer the first part of your question? I don't have really any hesitancy. I understood the changes. I thought that they were well explained. I'm not sure that they were of such substantive change that any long public review of them would really make a dramatic difference, or frankly, any difference in the way this ordinance is written. I have a concern about one item in here with regard to parking, which I stated, and I think you followed up with a similar concern with regard to the off-site, off-street parking situation, and whether or not that belongs in the ordinance, because as it's written here and included, it would seem to give exception to, opportunity for, not to continuing a similar type of pattern that we have where an overflow or an abundance of too many cars at a particular rental could spread out and around and then use that as justification instead of doing what the goal is, which is to try to tighten it up. And notwithstanding the resident versus the visitor property with how it's used. Mr. Ross is, who is one of my constituents. Description and understanding that its resident has a little bit different situation in that than a visitor does. So with that exception, following up on that, I am fine with moving forward, quite frankly, but looking also forward to what I think you're about to discuss with regard to a phase 2, as it's called.
Yeah, you do sense hesitance with me, okay? This is a huge deal. As far as the ordinance that has been adjusted here today, yes, I think that we need a little bit more time to digest. Point made with what we're going to do with beach and tennis, okay? I had no idea that they would have been one of the folks that I was talking about as far as going through that permitting process, right? That sounds pretty extensive for them. So them understanding, us understanding, I think, is worthy of a little bit more conversation. So I'm okay with it coming back to committee. I just want to say this out loud before we move on. And it comes up in our problem statement. You know, we're trying to accomplish a balance between a prized possession, which is our residents, and a prized possession, which is our visitor, okay? And I know for a fact that you can't always do that with code. Hilton Head Plantation has a restriction of short-term rentals, but you can rent a short-term rental in Hilton Head Plantation at the moment, okay? And my point is, you don't always fix it by code. So as we continue with these conversations, I just want us to be also supporting what Councilman Ames is saying as far as our educational and our messaging, as far as the expectations on Hilton Head. That's so important moving along. And we've been touching on it, but I'm not sure we've embraced it so much. So those are my comments, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stanford, any further comments?
I stated my position earlier that I think it's too early for us to be moving this forward to council, and that position remains. And you mentioned the service that would deal with complaints and issues. Is there a website or some location we can go to see how that actually works? I don't doubt what you're saying, but I would be very interested in seeing exactly how it does work.
I'll be happy to provide that information to you,
So
sir.
if you could, and make it available to the public as well.
Yes, sir.
So that everyone can see what it is we're choosing to use here. I think we definitely need to have a short-term rental ordinance here. Many of the features here are indeed what we need, but we need to see what they are in final form before we move it forward to council. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think that's well said. I was prepared to vote in favor of moving this forward today, but virtually at the last hour, the 11th hour, we got some changes that I just didn't feel ready to adopt with my vote. So, Ann, what is a reason? Come on up. I'll say this, though. It's my opinion that the issues that we still are wrestling with are nuances rather than substantive issues regarding this matter. So I would like staff to hear what we have said today and get us a draft ASAP so that we can move this along fairly and efficiently.
Yes, sir. If it pleases the committee, what I'd like to do is bring forward a draft ordinance to the meeting on March 24th. Is that sufficient, sir? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do you want to tee up second phase?
Before you do, sometimes, and I ask your indulgence, because sometimes we give our comments and they just sit there, and it's, I think, a good opportunity, honestly, for a dialogue and a communication. And so just wanting to better understand a couple of things or make an additional statement. I'd welcome conversation, though. Permitting. Correct me if I'm wrong, and then you can, the permitting piece is where the applicant, the short-term rental owner, is affirming all of the things that we're putting into our ordinance. And the reason it's important year after year is because things change, people change, whoever is owning. And I think that it's important that we continue to verify that there's working safety features in the home, that the parking hasn't changed, all of those items. And so the permitting isn't necessarily for an entire resort where they would be required for the permit. It's the individual who holds the business license to get their permit to affirm this information, so the town has some assurance that what we've asked to be followed is being followed, and that if it's not, and code or whoever the mechanism is, then we'll have something to bounce that off of to be enforced, to enforce it, correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's
Okay,
exactly
it seems
correct.
really simple to me, and a necessary part of the equation to make this really work. The other thing with regard to fixing things by code is that many of the behind the gates communities, in fact, many of the condo units, et cetera, they all have regulations, and they have parking and noise, we all do, regulations. But sometimes they aren't followed, and you need a next step, and the town is that umbrella next step. For other situations, there isn't anyone you can pick up the phone and call. You don't have a property manager overseeing a outside of the gates residential neighborhood necessarily. And so the code is important for those people so that everyone has an opportunity to have someone that they can pick up the phone or log on to this website to file a complaint, to make themselves heard, and to feel as though they've been understood and something will be attended to. So that's why the code is important. We've just gotten to that point, and with 9,500 and growing short-term rentals, and a change in the dynamics of how our island is really working for those of us who live here, This is the point we've come to. I don't know how you turn back the tables on that. I would like to. I would like everybody to be respectful of where they are. And I'm just going to step one further. And if anyone has any comment to that, I'm open and willing and interested in that discussion among my colleagues. But one step further, that is not just the code. One of the things that I think that we're missing as a town is, as I've said before, reviewing our current ordinances on noise and nuisance and parking to make sure they're aligned with the conditions that we find ourselves in. But really, how we permit new development, how we work with new development. And so many of the issues come to play because older homes are being taken down, new homes are putting up, not in a residential neighborhood, but not to be a residence. And those homes being designed specifically for or as a business. And that itself is really what's impacting what we're dealing with here. And unless we deal with that, everyone.
I think you are introducing the second
I
subject.
think I am, but I wanted to make sure that that's part and parcel of where we go down the road, so that code isn't just it. There's more that we can do. And so I hope we are able to continue this discussion. I welcome any phone calls from anyone who wants to talk to me about it personally. Thanks.
Thank you. And go ahead and tee up the second part of our discussion.
Yes, sir, thank you. So as we discussed during the last meeting, when we proposed having an ordinance and then issues for further review, I have a list of issues for further review that were included in your packet, and we haven't made any changes from those. I'll wait until Krista gets it pulled up on the screen, but yeah, thank you. These are based on the themes we heard in those meetings that we had, both the public meetings and individual phone calls, the survey, emails, phone calls. This is what we heard, and it encompasses, we hope, the main issues that folks have. And we're recommending that staff investigate these in the order that we're presenting them now. And I'll explain that as we move forward. So, the effects of mini hotels in neighborhoods. We've heard that from a lot of folks that they are concerned about very large single-family homes, especially those built on modest lots in residential neighborhoods. So the staff's task for that would be to define what is a mini hotel. Is it based on size? Is it based on bedrooms? Is it based on occupancy? Is it based on the floor area ratio? And then what is an appropriate size lot? Because there are some estate size lots, you might say, that could accommodate a large home that may be not of concern. Where are they located? What size are they? What kind of complaints have we received about them? And what are our options? And in terms of options, and I'll get into this in a minute, but there are many options to address these. And what we want to do is define the problem, define the what, say what the so what is, and then what now. So we'll give you all that information as we move through this process. The second is the effects of short-term rentals in neighborhoods. And this is part and parcel, this is part of the effects of many hotels in neighborhoods, but generally, even small short-term rentals. As stated in your purpose statement, there's a concern about the increasing number of short-term rentals, and especially in areas that previously had no or few short-term rentals. This is an issue that many communities have dealt with. There are many different options to look at. Whether there are too many short-term rentals, full stop. So that they're concerned that, we saw that increased trend line, which seems to have leveled out. There's some concern that that could pick back up or quickly or slowly, and that there could be too many short-term rentals. And that has a myriad effects. The amount of visitor lodging available at some point may decrease the value of that lodging itself. There's an increased demand for hospitality workers while simultaneously having less housing to put them in, an increased amount of traffic, people visiting the beach, and et cetera. The effects of short-term rental on housing itself. Specifically, do we have too few housing units because it's been converted to short-term rentals? And then the effects of short-term rentals on infrastructure. There's concern about wear and tear on roads. Did increase traffic, adequate water pressure for areas that have these large homes, other impacts on infrastructure. And then finally, environmental impacts of short-term rentals. We've heard a lot of folks say, and this isn't necessarily exclusive to short-term rentals, but they've seen in new development on the island, for housing and different development, trees being cleared on lots that previously weren't developed. There's a number of developments, and I'm not trying to pick on them, but in the area of formerly First, Second, Third Street, near Marriott Surf Watch, where for a number of years, especially during the economic downturn, there was no development. And now you can see that homes are being built in that area, and I suspect those are mostly short-term rentals due to location. So what we're asking is, have we captured the effect of your concerns with that list? And secondly, do you agree with the prioritization starting with focusing on mini hotels and short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods as our next area of focus for the short-term rentals, and simultaneously while we work on finalizing the ordinance and getting that up to speed? And if you agree with those, what we'll do is put together a preliminary framework to define, analyze, and make recommendations on each issue. And we'll also develop a timeline. We expect that as we move into this, we will get a much clearer sense of the time frame that this will take and what your priorities are. So our recommendation, if you agree with what we've proposed, is to bring that back to you also on March 24th for your review and comment.
Glenn, I'll start with you today.
Thank you, David. First priority is getting the short-term rental ordinance
Yes, sir.
Before us. We all understand that. After saying that, I think you've come up with a really good list and a good prioritization of the issues for us to deal with. We have a big global issue. We need to break it down into manageable pieces, and you've done that for us, and I look forward to your reports.
Thank you.
Brown?
Yes, I agree with moving forward in this fashion. I do have, I guess, some questions, not necessarily I'm looking for answers right now, but these are just twirling through my head as we go through this process. I'm definitely in support of us, creating ordinances that addresses the first set and also what we're talking about here, okay? But when we talk about short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods, okay, are we defining neighborhoods that already currently have short-term rentals, or are we talking about all neighborhoods island-wide? And I'm not quite putting my arms around that one, okay? And the question of do we currently have too many short-term rentals or not? I go back to that balance within our purpose statement, okay? And, I mean, let's face it, market determines a lot of it, but when I talk about not just using code, what I'm also suggesting is that there's got to be some incentive for property owners that are not currently doing short-term rentals to do something else, okay? And we don't necessarily have that at the moment. And I think that's needs to be a part of our discussion moving forward if we're looking to stabilize our imbalance that we currently have. That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Becker?
So just want to follow up on that, trying to start a conversation. Those who are not using properties as short-term rentals to do something else, I'm not sure what that means.
I'll go back to, us taking a look at the island as a whole, where short-term rentals are currently happening. I mean, the heat map clearly shows that there are areas of great concentration for short-term rentals, okay? And you start to see just spotting in other areas of short-term rentals, okay? And the reason that is happening is because the market is wide open, okay? Folks want to make money off of their properties. And what I'm suggesting is that if we're going to tell some of the places on Hilton Head that are not necessarily hot spots at the moment that you can't do short-term rentals, well, they need to have the ability to enjoy some sort of property right when it comes to economic development. And I'm not sure what that is at the moment, but we need to at least have that conversation moving forward, because right now we have much interest from the short-term rental community and the residents that are negatively affected. The moment that we go out and say that you can no longer use your property for short-term rental, and you may have had that in your long-term plans, we're gonna have a new room of people addressing us, okay? So that's where I'm going with that.
Okay, I just wanted to have a conversation. I haven't heard from any of us that we would be denying people the right to have a short-term rental with their property. I don't believe that's been part of the conversation that's been moved forward. So I think anyone hearing that should know that that has not been part of the conversation moving forward, that we would disallow people to use their property in that way. It's just the manner in which they do and whether or not it fits the circumstances of the type of home and space that they have available to them to have that type of activity. And then overarching, that is to keep in mind that these are residential neighborhoods, whether they're behind the gates or whether they're outside of the gates, and that utilization of that property should be primarily as a residential home. And not a business, to complete that sentence. And so with that, I certainly, Anne, appreciate all the hard work you're doing. I have no doubt the most respect for you with all of those of us who've listened to patiently, taken careful notes with regarding our comments and where we will end up the next time we meet. So thank you for that, and thank you, Chair, for your patience with me.
And I'm not convinced that the way these items are described necessarily get us further down the road. I think the situation is much more complex, and let me explain what I'm talking about. We understand viscerally the effects of many hotels and neighborhoods if we live in those areas where we are affected. We understand that many of them are being run as pure businesses as opposed to residential occupation. We understand that the reward of having a short-term rental is far greater in terms of property values than a full-time resident. We hear that we're trying to protect, to some degree, the quality of neighborhoods for full-time residents. So we can viscerally say there are effects on many hotels, but we have to dive much deeper than that in order to have an understanding of what it means to have a town policy to impact this balance that we're trying to achieve. So I don't have a problem going forward with number one, effects on many hotels, because I think it's a little bit easier to quantify because the condominium behind some POA is a much different animal than a 7,000 or 8,000 square foot condo in the or a house in the middle of a otherwise residential area. So I think that's a priority we can move towards. Effects on short-term rentals in neighborhoods. That's pretty wishy-washy, and I think we've already done that. I think everything that we've learned about the reason we have an ordinance speaks to the deleterious effects on short-term rentals in neighborhoods. I don't know where we go with number two, but if you have ideas, I'd like to hear them. But let me continue. Whether there are too many short-term rentals, that's a very difficult economic equation to get a hold of. And it does get at some point down to subjectivity, but if we are going to try to be empirical, I think then that requires a lot of serious thinking. Was 7,500 a better number than 9,500? Are we really going down the tube if we have 12,500? I don't have good answers for those today. I have instinctive reactions to them, but I can't build an ordinance based on intuition. And so I don't know what staff does on that one. But I think it's important for us to understand that because we're talking capacity there. For effects of short-term rentals on housing. Absolutely, clearly, unmistakably an impact in terms of property values, in terms of land accommodation scarcity. I mean, to me, that is one that we can grab a hold of and speak to the issue of what we are doing to our community when we erode the workforce housing base and have that converted to short-term rentals. To me, that's a huge one. So I personally would reorder your list to some degree in that area. Effects on short-term rentals on infrastructure, we talk about that in a number of different ways. Yeah, I think we can jump to the conclusion, sure, if you used to have 4 people living in a single-family house 65 days of the year, and now you have basically 20 living in the house 50 weeks of the year or 45 weeks of the year, there's going to be a difference of impact. There's going to be a difference of impact in terms of water, sewer, drainage, and all that stuff. There's going to be an impact in the neighborhood experience and so on. Yeah, there's going to be an impact. And so that, to me, relates to too many short-term rentals or not. Okay. So I think you begin to look at these things as interconnected in order to make progress. So I'm resisting to some degree to staff's proposal to simplify it. Environmental impacts on short-term rentals. Boy, that's a hot button for me because of the environment. Anytime you use the word environment, you get my attention. But that has to do also with overbuilding single-family lots, gross ground coverage, and so on and so forth. So I think that one has to be scoped out a little bit more. We have to understand what we really mean by that. Is it only trees that we're talking about, or is it flora and fauna that we care about? I want to protect the environment, but I'm not absolutely convinced yet that we have the grounds to put that environmental tag on short-term rentals. Okay. I understand viscerally how a mega house or a mini hotel has a greater impact than what used to be a 2,500 square foot house. But I think we have to be more specific. Otherwise, I think it feels like we're just hanging laundry on a clothesline. It's not really picking. It's the community has to have, and I'm talking about the broad community, not only the business community, I think a greater confidence that we really are going to attack what needs to be attacked. Okay. All right? Now, I'll close with a comment that Drew Brown made in his opening public statement, and that is that there's an opportunity for partnership here. And I think it is absolutely critical that we create the dialogue with the property managers of this community because of their experience and charge them with coming forward what they would do under our circumstances. The people at the extremes we will hear about. I'm perceiving the property managers of being moderates in the middle who understand the balance better than most people. And so I'm asking Drew and I'm asking the other property managers to convene and answer the question, what do we want to recommend to solve these issues of mini hotels, short-term rentals in neighborhoods, too many short-term rentals, and so on and so forth. Those are public sentiments that have been raised. So what's their response to them? Drew? Thank you very much. Okay.
Can I just jump in 1 second? Because what it amounts to is our development policies that we have, which isn't touched in this. And it's really, to me, some of the core points. Are we allowing development that are 8, 9, 10, 11 bedroom mini hotels in residential neighborhoods versus to be rented out as businesses versus building a residential home that someone might also choose to rent? A home, thinking it one step further, has a resale to both those who want to live here full-time, those who want to live here part-time and rent sometimes. That is in my mind, a smarter way to build community development and bring Hilton Head along as a residential island where our visitors choose to come back and work, live, and play. So I think that's the distinction that we're missing. We're allowing many hotels to be built and rented exclusively, rather than homes that might be rented. And then on resale, who else are you going to sell a 9, 10, 11 bedroom home to except for another investor? So the cycle continues and we never get to regain our residential neighborhoods. We never get to regain our population of young families and those who want to move here and retire and enjoy a quality life that Hilton Head's Paradise has always offered. So unless we address that, which isn't necessarily represented in these items that were just brought forward, but until we address that core issue, I don't think we're really going to ultimately solve the problems that are within what you brought forward. And so I wanted to make that really, really clear. Someone earlier mentioned that we are a world-class destination. We absolutely, positively are. And the only way we remain that way is by focusing in on what I perceive, anyway. I'm happy for a discussion as that core issue that I just described.
Thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
If there are no more comments from the committee, Ann, do you have absolute clarity on where you're going with this?
Perfectly clear. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Okay, so on March 24th?
March 24th, our intent is to bring you an ordinance that is ready for your final review based on the comments that you made today. Our goal would be then to, Sean, do you want to interrupt me? No, our goal then would be to bring that forth to the next town council meeting, available to have council vote on it. Also at that next meeting, have a preliminary framework for you, at least for mini hotels, and give some additional consideration to your priorities that you mentioned today for future investigation.
Excellent.
Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll jump in for a second. Sean Colin, Interim Community Development Director. We'll make sure to get the draft ordinance complete, ready for public review and your review at least a week in advance of the 24th, so everyone has time to go through, collect their thoughts, and be able to speak intelligently on March 24th, but that's the goal.
Thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate that.
As Mr. Stanford asked for, a demonstration of what the products that we're looking at, so you have an idea. We haven't selected a certain software company yet, but we'll show you what the possibilities are.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, public, for your patience and your comments. We stand adjourned.
So moved.